Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, we thank Thee, Lord, for Thy wonderful grace for another week that Thou hast see us through. Thank Thee, Lord, for bringing us back for this Sunday school. And may Thou, Lord, continue to bless us with Thy presence, that all together we may make progress and learn from one another about Thy truth, and even Thy truth in science and in creation. For we are convinced, O Lord, Thou art the truth, and what Thou revealed to us through Thy words, that is, that this whole world, this whole universe, and the whole of mankind, and the very fact that we are created in Your image, all these are true. Help us, Father, therefore, to be able to learn our ground on this truth, that we may be able to stand for Thee, to witness for Thee also against this current teaching of evolution. So, Father, we hereby commit ourselves into Thy hand. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, good morning, everybody. This month here, we will be doing natural selection. Yeah, the learning objective that, anyway, by the way, I prepared for 3 weeks of material, and this month we have 5 weeks, so we have one additional week. So we shall explore along the way how we're going to use that 4th week. Yeah, but some of this today's lesson may overrun the time because we have some quite a few videos to watch. So the learning objective of this month's study on which is on natural selection, is to understand what evolution theory is claiming. All right, so we want to know what they're saying and how biblical truth can stand against it, or how does that fetch in the light of biblical truth. So 3 parts, like the last month structure. So part 1 is natural selection and evolution. Part 2, we look at the book, look at this book here. Practically we walk through the content of this evolution Achilles Heels book, see what the book have to say against in this subject of natural selection. And part 3, just like last month, we're going to do some Bible study. It's a discussion time, so please, by the way, the material have been sent to you, so please feel free to take a look. So part 1, natural selection and evolution, we're going to learn what the evolution theory is claiming and what the scientific basis that this theory is claiming. All right, I think it's important for us to understand what they're saying. Part 2, which is next week lesson, we're going to learn from Dr. Donald Button, so practically chapter 1 of this book. And there's some slight order issue because this book starts with natural selection as chapter 1 and then followed by genetics as chapter 2. And the conclusion from this book here is that it is too complex. When you look at human body, the makeup, all that is too complex for natural selection to be true, or to account for what we are today. Now, that part we have done last month. We have already run the conclusion that human genome, all these are just too complex for natural selection to take place. So there's a slight tweak here in part 2 here. So instead of moving into that conclusion, now we move into a biblical perspective conclusion on the fact that men are created in the image of God. Right? So from this natural selection, we're going to move into that direction. So a slight deviation from the conclusion from this book, but part 2 by large, if you walk through the content, is follow largely what this book is written. Part 3, we do Bible study, and the core theme is understand the fact that human is created in the image of God, and how nature, what we see every day around us, how this nature is supporting this truth. All right, and that's meant to be a discussion. So please read the material and prepare in time before time your answer, and let's have a good discussion like before. All right, let's start our material. First is the history. today we start with evolution theory. So now, the very fact here is evolution theory is not new. I mean, Charles Darwin did not create, he's not the only one that created evolutionary theory, although his name is attached to it. So this is a quick history. Before him, there's already various talk started as early as 1707 by Carl Linnaeus. And I think the rest we can read here. Not very important, but just over time, various people have got different insight onto this thinking that that there's no God, and what we are today is by some kind of so-called nature process and so forth. The breakthrough point come at Alfred Russel Wallace. All right, you will read, I mean, you will go to see from one of the video later that this man actually had very similar thinking with Charles Darwin. So he actually disclosed, he was quite excited by Charles Darwin idea. So he actually disclosed what he had with Darwin. And so they make a joint announcement about their theory. And later, Charles Darwin, for fear that he lost credit of the inventor of this theory, so he published the book, and that leads to the subsequent event, the publication of this origin of life, and then evolution theory, and so forth and so forth. Now we're going to see this in the video later. All right. So that's a quick history of evolution theory. Now let's take a look. Who is Charles Darwin? All right. Charles Darwin, his full name is Charles Robert Darwin, born in 12 April 1809, and died. I mean, the date is all written here. He was an Englishman, well, in a way, quite a knowledgeable person, a naturalist, geologist, and biologist, you can call it. And he studied medicine in Edinburgh University. In short, it's quite it's a well-known person. And he started to have this idea of evolution as early as in 1838. So this is in his autobiography. So he began to entertain the idea about the fittest survive. And what happened is in 1859, which is, if you take a look, it's actually about 20 years. From 1838 to 1859 is about 20 years. So after 20 years that he has first moved the idea of evolution, eventually on 1859, he published this book called On the Origin of Species. So it wasn't immediately accepted, not until 1870 that the scientific community begin to take his theory seriously. But still, it is not a widespread teaching like what we see today. Not until 1930, between that period, 1930 and 1950, around that period, it suddenly gained huge momentum. And today, needless to say, it has become so-called a default, so to say. A default, sorry, beg pardon. Become a default. Now, after the publication of The Origin of Life, about 10 years later, initially he faced with a lot of questions, so forth. So he fine-tuned his theory. So after 10 years later, in 1871, he made another further publication called The Origin of Man by Means of Natural Selection. All right. Now, so in this book here, he go into greater detail how man was formed and then how race was formed. So, but by the way, I do not see his point very convincing when you talk about race and so forth. And then why is man become stronger than woman and so forth. So it addressed all these different issues, including insect and so forth. Yeah. Now, this is comment by Cambridge University Press. And this book is sold in Amazon, so based on the editor comment also. Now, you can take a look at their comment, but practically you can see from the view of the world that the evolution have been taken as the truth today. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to walk through with you a few videos. Some of it, the information is a bit overlapped. So I asked for patience to bear with it, but I'm going to show 3 videos that give you a good idea what the world is talking about in terms of evolution theory. All right.
The belief that God had created mankind in his own image and likeness was shared by most Western scientists until the middle of the 19th century. They thought all the creatures of the planet had been conceived by a divine force. That is, until Charles Darwin arrived. Some researchers were already talking about an evolution of the species, but the British naturalist was the first to explain with evidence how evolution might occur. By natural selection. His theory radically changed biology, offering a new explanation of the origin of human beings. It also made him one of the most influential scientists and intellectuals in history. But to get there, he had to make an extraordinary journey, perform hundreds of experiments, and spend 20 years refining his ideas. In 1831, Darwin was 22 years old and studying at the University of Cambridge when he was invited as a naturalist to a great expedition. He boarded the HMS Beagle and spent almost 5 years traveling several continents, starting in South America, from which he brought back dozens of live specimens, illustrations, and fossils. These fossils gave him one of the first clues about evolution. For example, observing the remains of a mylodon, a giant animal similar to the sloth, he thought that those similarities were probably not a coincidence. There had to be some kind of link. When he stopped at the Galapagos Islands, Darwin also observed its giant tortoises, which lived in nearby islands but showed unique physical characteristics in each island. In the humid areas, where vegetation was abundant, the turtles had a short neck and a dome-shaped shell. Whilst in the islands with a drier environment, they had a saddle-like shell and a longer neck. But could he explain that difference? Upon his return, Darwin spent time observing how animal breeders and gardeners crossbred animals of a species to create new varieties. For that creation to be successful, the artificial selection made by man was key. Darwin realized that the natural world probably made the same kind of selection, but he couldn't explain how it happened. Until he read the work of Thomas Robert Malthus, a British intellectual from the 18th century. In an essay on demography, Malthus said that as the population in Europe was growing, at one point it would increase much more than the food supplies available, and that would cause a fight for survival. This idea helped Darwin explain how evolution works. In nature, there is a struggle for survival, in which the strongest individual is not necessarily the survivor. Instead, it's the one which best adapts to the environment where it lives. If a living being has any trait that helps him to survive, it will be more successful at reproduction. Those which don't adapt will die without descendants. The creatures with the most success in reproducing pass their traits to their lineage, and so on, until these variations end up becoming a new species. That's why the differences between the Galapagos tortoises were a product of evolution. In a drier environment, those with longer necks could reach the bushes easily in order to get food, whilst those who lived in the humid environment could eat grass and protect themselves from predators, thanks to their shorter neck and the dome-shaped shell. Darwin said that all species, including humans, were not created independently, but they descended from a common ancestor. From then on, life on the planet began to diversify. 20 years after his trip, Darwin had written thousands of pages, but he hadn't published any. He wanted to have irrefutable evidence, perhaps because he knew that his theory was going to cause quite a stir. But everything changed when he received a letter from Alfred Russel Wallace, an admirer and fellow naturalist who told him that he had reached the same conclusion. Evolution was produced by natural selection. Darwin panicked, facing the possibility that Wallace could take sole credit for the theory, so the two naturalists agreed to present a joint letter explaining their findings. But a year later, Darwin published his book titled On the Origin of Species, and he became a celebrity way beyond the scientific community. His findings shook the foundations of Victorian Britain. Like Copernicus in his time, Darwin changed the game by explaining that diversity came from a biological process without any interference from God. Darwin put human beings in the same evolutionary level as all the creatures on the planet. Scientific advances have confirmed his theory, and even the Catholic Church ended up accepting, decades later, that evolution is compatible with faith. And today, more than 150 years after Darwin's theory became known, we know that evolution is a fact. The planet keeps changing, sometimes dramatically, and we keep changing with it.
Okay, so this is, I hope that served a good introduction to the evolution theory. Now, what's next? I'm going to show you two videos which was explain what evolution theory is exactly what it's talking about, and also what is natural selection. Okay, this is the next video.
This episode of Stated Clearly was made possible through generous donations by Bird and Moon Comics, Proof Avenue, and contributions from individual viewers like you. Stated Clearly presents, what exactly is evolution? In biology, the theory of evolution doesn't tell us exactly how life began on Earth, but it helps us understand how life, once it came into existence, diversified into the many incredible forms we see now and in the fossil record. It also helps us make sense of the way in which modern creatures continue to adapt and change today. In biology, evolution can be defined as any change in the heritable traits, those are physical traits like fur color in mice, spots on the wings of butterflies, or instinctive behaviors like the way that dogs greet their friends with a sniff, within a population across generations. This definition can be a bit confusing, so let's see how it works. All healthy living things, from single-celled amoebas to flowers to dolphins, are capable of reproduction. We have children, we make copies of ourselves. We do this by duplicating our DNA and passing that DNA on to future generations. DNA is a chain-like chemical stored inside each one of your cells, which tells them how to grow and function. Your DNA contains coded information on how to build you. The information in your DNA is different than that of, say, a daffodil's DNA, which is why you look and function differently than a daffodil. The information in your DNA is slightly different than that of Elvis Presley, which is one of many reasons you don't look or act quite like he did. Single-celled amoebas and other simple creatures reproduce by copying their DNA inside their guts, moving both copies to either side of their body, splitting in two right down the middle, and then growing back to full size. If all goes well, the two new amoebas will be exact copies of each other, but in nature, things aren't always perfect. When DNA is being copied, errors can occur which modify the DNA code. This is what we call a DNA mutation. These mutations, which happen completely on accident and randomly to any part of a DNA strand, can produce variation in the body shape and function of the creature who inherits the modified DNA. In this case, our new little friend has an arm that stretches extra long. If he survives long enough to grow and reproduce, that extra stretchy arm, which is now coded for in his DNA, will be passed on to his children. Evolution. Any change in the heritable traits within a population across generations has officially occurred. Reproduction for dolphins and badgers and people is a little more complicated. We have to find ourselves a partner. When two badgers get together and, fall in love, a sperm cell from the father, which contains a copy of half of his DNA, only half, combines with the egg cell of the mother, which contains half a copy of her DNA. The result is a brand new cell with a complete set of DNA instructions, all the information needed to divide and grow up into a brand new badger. The new child matures to be similar to her parents, but also unique because she develops some traits from her mother's DNA and some from her father. Her new combination of traits can be passed on to her children, and again, Evolution. Any change in the heritable traits within a population across generations has officially occurred. Besides a unique recombination of her parents' traits, she might also have developed some completely new traits of her own due to DNA mutations. Maybe extra hairy ears, for example. If she survives long enough to have kids, her DNA will combine with the DNA of her partner, and she'll pass on those extra hairy ears to at least some of her children. Again, evolution has officially occurred. So there you have it. Evolution is really pretty simple. Scientists and normal folks everywhere witness evolution happening all the time. Small changes like the ones we've seen here can add up over multiple generations to create dramatic changes. If you were to go back in time just a few thousand years, you'd find that all dogs, for example, originally evolved from an ancestral group of gray wolves. The evolution of those wolves from generation to generation was guided by humans. People were selecting wolves with the traits they liked, letting them breed, and then only keeping the puppies with the most desirable traits. As time went on, different breeders preferred dogs with different features. Some selected for large size, some for small size, some for brains, others for brawn. Today, wolves have branched out into hundreds of breeds, very few of which look and behave much like their ancestors. A massive amount of observable evidence from many different fields such as genetics, chemistry, paleontology, and mathematics overwhelmingly suggests that just like all dogs share a common ancestor, all living things, me, you, pufferfish, banana trees, if you go back far enough, also share a common ancestor. We are literally related. We don't know what the first life form was or exactly how it came to be, but the simple process of reproduction with variation over billions of years looks to be responsible for all the diversity of life we see today. Now, you might be saying, wait a minute, hold on here. Isn't evolution random? To do something functional like turn a wolf into an adorable mini poodle, random evolution had to be carefully guided by an intelligent dog breeder. Researchers claim that all mammals evolved from an ancient shrew-like creature. But the difference between a shrew and an elephant is far greater than that of a wolf and a poodle. Who guided that process? Who was the breeder? In the mid-1800s, two men, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, independently discovered that a breeder is not necessarily needed. There is another force capable of guiding random evolution to produce order and complex function. They called it natural selection, which happens to be the entire topic of our next video. But before you move on, let's recap what we've learned so far. Biological evolution is any change in heritable traits within a population across generations. All healthy living things can make copies of themselves, but they do so imperfectly. Small variations can add up over generations to create dramatic differences in the body form and function of living creatures. Evidence overwhelmingly suggests that all life on Earth is related. So remember, next time you invite family and friends over for a holiday feast, you're actually just inviting family. That includes the turkey and the pumpkin in the pumpkin pie. I'm John Perry, and that's evolution stated clearly. Thanks for watching our show. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to give us a thumbs up on YouTube and subscribe to us if you want to see more. Stated Clearly is funded by our viewers, and we are in need of support.
Okay. So that video explained quite clearly the worldview about evolution theory. And as he summarized, maybe let me just reiterate what he summarized so as to make the point clearer. So what the evolution theory is saying is that all living things that we see today, they are from a common descent. All right, so this is one of the key terms, common descent, even include what you mentioned about pumpkin pie and so forth. All this evolved from the very, very same source. Yeah, so that is point number one for evolution theory. Second point, what is advocating is also that new threads can produce in a random process. So this evolution by mutation and so forth, those that we have done last month. So it's a random process when you form, during mutation, but and new traits are being formed under that so-called random process. Now, what's next is we're going to watch another video which he will explain natural selection, and at the end of the previous video, what he's saying, from the random produce of a new trait, now the subsequent evolution that is guided by a process called natural selection, and this process come in two forms. Can be human, can be so-called human, biased by human effort, like farmer and so forth, or the other aspect is guided by real nature, by natural survival and so forth. Yeah. So let's watch the next video. It will into greater detail.
This episode of Stated Clearly was only possible with support from our viewers and from Brain Tools LLC, a company dedicated to developing and delivering to patients new treatments for Alzheimer's. Stated Clearly presents, what is natural selection? Natural selection is one of several key concepts contained within the theory of evolution. To understand exactly what natural selection is and why it's so important, let's first take a quick look at two other evolutionary concepts, descent with modification and the overarching idea of common descent. Descent with modification is the observable fact that when parents have children, those children often look and behave slightly different than their parents and slightly different than each other. They descend their parents with modifications. The differences found in offspring are partially due to random genetic mutations. Common descent is the idea that all living things on Earth are related. They descended from a common ancestor. Through the gradual process of descent with modification over many, many generations, a single original species is thought to have given rise to all the life we see today. The common descent of all life on Earth is not a directly observable fact. We have no way of going back in time to watch it happen. Instead, common descent is a conclusion based on a massive collection of facts. Facts found independently in the study of fossils, genetics, comparative anatomy, mathematics, biochemistry, and species distribution. Because the evidence for common descent is so overwhelming, the concept has been around since ancient times. In the past, however, it was rejected by many philosophers and scientists for one main reason. You cannot get order and complexity from random chaos alone. The bodies and behaviors of living things are extremely complex and orderly. Descent with modification simply produces random variation. All through history, no one could explain how complex life arose from simple life through random variation until Charles Darwin discovered natural selection. Charles Darwin, who lived from 1809 to 1882, was a naturalist, someone who studies nature. At the start of his career, he traveled the world by ship, collecting and documenting plants and animals. During his travels, Darwin became very interested in the idea of common descent. He noticed that islands contain species of plants and animals unique to those islands. They can't be found anyplace else on Earth, but they often look and behave surprisingly similar to creatures found on nearby continents. Tortoises on the Galapagos Islands can be distinguished from those of Africa. Meanwhile, with the exception of size, they're almost identical to a species found nearby in South America. Darwin believed these similarities could be best explained through common descent. Long ago, a tortoise from the mainland may have drifted to the islands, possibly on a raft of storm debris, and once arriving, laid her eggs. Random changes caused by descent with modification over thousands of years eventually transformed the island creatures and the mainland creatures so much that they could no longer be considered the same species. This idea made good sense to Darwin, except for one thing. The island creatures he found weren't just randomly different from their mainland cousins. They were specially adapted for island life. The Galapagos is a collection of 18 main islands, many of which are home to tortoises. The larger islands have lots of grass and vegetation. Tortoises there grow extra heavy and have dome-like shells. Some of the smaller islands have very little grass, forcing the tortoises to feed on island cactus. The best cactus pads grow on the tops of these plants. Fortunately, tortoises on these islands are equipped with expanded front legs and saddle-like shells, allowing them to stretch their necks extra long to reach their food. It's almost as if these island creatures have been perfectly sculpted to survive within their unique environments. How did this sculpting take place? Random descent with modification alone could never do such a thing. Darwin drew upon his knowledge of selective breeding to answer this question. For thousands of years, farmers have been taking wild plants and animals and through the process of selective breeding have sculpted the original wild forms into new domestic forms much better suited for human use and consumption. The process is slow but simple. If a single plant produces 100 seeds, most will grow to be nearly identical to the parent plant. A few, however, will be slightly different. Some variations will be undesirable, smaller size, bitter taste, vulnerability to disease, and so on. Other variations will be highly valued, thicker, sweeter leaves, for example. If a farmer only allows the best plants to reproduce and create seeds for the next crop, small positive changes will add up over multiple generations, eventually producing a dramatically superior vegetable. You might be surprised to hear that broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage are all just different breeds of a single type of weed commonly found along the shores of the English Channel. The evolution of this original plant into all the varieties we see today was carefully guided by different farmers around the world who simply selected for different traits. It's important to note that the farmer doesn't actually create anything. Random descent with modification creates new traits. The farmer simply chooses which of those new creations are allowed to reproduce and which are not. Darwin proposed that nature itself is also capable of selection. It may not have an intelligent brain like a farmer, but nature is an extremely dangerous place in which to live. There are germs which can kill you, animals that can eat you. You could die of heat exhaustion. You could die of exposure to the cold. When parents produce a variety of offspring, nature, simply by being difficult to survive in, decides which of those variations get to live and reproduce, and which do not. Over multiple generations, creatures become more and more fit for survival and reproduction within their specific environments. Darwin called this process natural selection. Since Darwin first put forth his idea in the mid-1800s, natural selection has been studied and witnessed numerous times in nature and in the science lab. What started out as a mere idea is now officially an observable fact. Darwin's discovery has greatly expanded our understanding of the natural world. It's led to countless new breakthroughs, and it finally allowed scientists to seriously consider the idea of common descent. So to sum things up, what exactly is natural selection? Natural selection is the process by which random evolutionary changes are selected for by nature in a consistent, orderly, non-random way. Through the process of descent with modification, new traits are randomly produced. Nature then carefully decides which of those new traits to keep. Positive changes add up over multiple generations. Negative traits are quickly discarded. Through this simple, ongoing process, nature, even though it does not have a thinking mind, is capable of producing incredibly complex and beautiful creations. I'm John Perry, and that's Natural Selection, Stated clearly.
Okay, yeah, so now we have seen how they explain how natural selection is being explained. So just to take stock, what have been said so far, all right? First, evolution, evolution theory consists of these following key elements. First element is common descent, all right? So they are saying that everything all start from one single source and then it's keep evolving, multiply, evolve, and so forth. Now, in short, new traits are randomly produced. All right, so that process is the random process, and this comes from mutation and so forth. By mutation, which we learned last month, new characteristic of in the genome are being produced, and that is a random process. But having created these new traits, now the subsequent evolution is selected by nature in a consistent, orderly, and non-random way. All right, that's what this theory is telling us. All right, so I hope I summarize it rightly or short and sharp. Just remember, evolution theory therefore consists of these three key elements and three key concepts. All right, look like we are doing quite better than I thought actually. Now, yeah, kind of like bring into attention in the process of trying to summarize. Now, so let's put together all the things that we know. In short, evolution process is like what the arrow that you see here from left going to right. And it starts with a common descent. That's what they're saying. Now, but having said this theory, the reality is this. As we have learned from last month, we learned about cell division, and cell division has got two types, mitosis and meiosis. All right. So for evolution to claim the three elements that I just mentioned, in reality, you're saying that from the simple cell division process, nature have the ability to guide this evolution into mitosis process, meaning a simple split of cells, and then and subsequently also a meiosis process, which God designed for the reproduction of mankind. And you know how complex that process. Within the pair of chromosome of each human, of the father and mother, is being break into half and then randomly mixed, and then you form back 23 pair of chromosome, and that's what the child will get. That process by itself is complex, and for evolution theory to claim what it is, the reality is they are saying that this process can form by natural selection. Next level of consideration is now we know from last month's study that in our cell there is prokaryote and eukaryote cell. Prokaryote is very basic cell like a blood cell. Most of our human cells are eukaryote, whereby it have a nucleus, and in this nucleus there's some intelligence to process the genome info and then produce proteins, and that protein define the function of the cell. So therefore you have a kidney cell, you have an eye cell, you have a stomach cell, you have a brain cell or whatsoever, all defined by the protein of that cell to be of those functions. So again, the complexity here that we need to realize, or evolutionists need to realize, is when you talk about common descent, you are saying that the natural selection process have the ability not just to form this prokaryote cell, but also able to evolve it into eukaryote cell. And this is just a cell. Eventually, the whole system has the intelligence to come together to form a whole being, and then from what chimpanzee or however you call it, become a full human. That's what evolutionary theory is talking about. All right, so we need to understand the depth of complexity is involved. Right now, they mentioned about natural selection, and okay, the fact is there are some artificial factors into it, like selected breeding, and also factors like the fittest survive. All right, so there are some type of animal just being extinct because they are not good enough to survive, and they are being extinct by some factors. Now, to add on to that, as a matter of fact, environment do have some impact on the mutation process, like what radiation from the suns, chemical like smoking, like some kind of chemical do have an impact onto the mutation process, and that can form new traits and so forth, disease, infectious agent and so forth. Now, so yeah, there are factors in the nature, or there are factors that classify under natural selection that can shape the formation, the mutation process, and so forth. Yeah. So this is what we need to recognize so far. There's such thing called natural selection process, but as far as evolution is concerned, we need to understand the complexity involved, claimed by the evolutionists. All right. Now, next, look like we still have a bit of time. We're going to go into a case study. Now, I have two case studies here. I think we only have time to do one. We'll do the next one next week. Two cases are often cited by evolutionists for evolution. One is whales, okay, and I mean, it surprised me in this study, on this case study. So a whale is actually a land animal and then go into the sea. Now, let's see whether it makes sense. Next one is about the guppies experiment. We'll probably don't have time to do it today. We'll do it next week. All right. So let's look at the whales case study first. Right?
This episode is supported by the Great Courses Plus. We know whales as graceful giants. Some are powerful hunters, some are gentle filter feeders, but no matter what they eat or how they live, whales as we know them are bound to the sea. But there was actually a time when whales could walk. The tale of whale evolution is a story about one of the most remarkable transitions in the history of mammals. The fossil record shows how these animals transformed from tiny four-legged plant eaters no bigger than house cats to the seafaring giants we know today. This change was dramatic and kind of fast. Fossils from over the past 50 million years have revealed whale-like animals of all shapes and sizes, each like a piece in the puzzle of whale evolution. Smack in the middle of this amazing transformation is Ambulocetus, a toothy predator the size of a sea lion, and a striking example of a mammal order in transition. Ambulocetus lived about 48 million years ago in what is now northern India and Pakistan, and its full name, Ambulocetus natans, literally means the walking, swimming whale. But scientists will tell you that it wasn't really great at either. In the water, it was a powerful swimmer, but not very fast or efficient. On land, it was clumsy too, with legs that splayed out to the sides, a belly that almost dragged on the ground, and a snout that was so long and heavy it looked like it could barely lift its head. But Ambulocetus was perfectly equipped for its environment. It lived in partially freshwater environments like river deltas, where it lurked in the shallows and grabbed whatever prey that came near its giant snout. Now, if a long aquatic ambush predator sounds kind of familiar, that's because Ambulocetus is basically the mammal version of a crocodile. It lived a lifestyle that was a lot like a crocodilian's, ideal for an animal that lives between the land and water. But despite their similarities, crocodiles and whales are not directly related at all. In fact, the group of mammals that includes whales and dolphins, known as cetaceans, are so different from other living mammals that it's been hard to figure out what exactly they evolved from. Interestingly, research done in both the field and in the lab revealed some surprises. First, in the 1980s and 90s, a set of genetic studies took sequences of DNA from whales and compared them to the same sequences in other living animals. And these comparisons showed that the cetaceans are actually most closely related to a group known as artiodactyls, hoofed mammals that includes hippos, pigs, and deer. Then a number of fossils found a little later seemed to support the same conclusion. In 2007, paleontologists in Kashmir, India found the fossils of a 47-million-year-old hoofed creature the size of a house cat that they named Indohyus. It turned out that this tiny mammal had a specialized thickened ear bone that, until this discovery, had only been found in whales. The bone, called an involucrum, helps aquatic mammals hear underwater, and it shows up even in the earliest cetaceans. It also had other adaptations for life in the water, like really dense leg bones, a trait that helps keep mammals like hippos weighted down when they're walking through a river. But But Indohyus wasn't a cetacean. It had forelegs and hooves, for crying out loud. It even had a special ankle bone called an astragalus, shaped kind of like a pulley, and that feature is only found in artiodactyls. Some very early cetaceans have this ankle bone too, which tells us that cetaceans evolved from artiodactyls. So Indohyus is now largely considered the closest non-cetacean relative of whales. Unlike Ambulocetus, it's not a member of the immediate whale family, but it shares a common ancestor with them, helping to connect today's artiodactyls. In other words, if Ambulocetus represents the transition from land to water, then Indohyus represents the transition from artiodactyls to whales. By the time the first recognizable whales like Basilosaurus show up in the fossil record about 40 million years ago, this group of mammals would never come out of the water again. But there's still a question of why? Why would a cute little deer thing end up leading a whole order of mammals to life in the deep sea? That's a question that remains unanswered. Maybe there were fewer predators in the sea than on land 50 million years ago. Or maybe there was more food in the ocean and less competition for it. After all, from Indohyus to Ambulocetus, there are many adaptations that show us that the diet of these animals changed from land-based sources to aquatic prey. But food probably isn't the whole reason. Whales are predators, but the only other mammals that moved from land to water are manatees and dugongs, and they're both herbivores. So, as in many other areas of natural history, we don't have all the answers yet. But still, let's just pause to appreciate the fact that it took less than 20 million years, about the evolutionary equivalent of a lunch break, for this entire astonishing transition to take place. And there in the middle is the walking, swimming whale, linking whales as we know them to tiny cat-sized deer things just dipping their toes in the water for the first time. Thanks to the Great Courses Plus for supporting PBS Digital Studios. The Great Courses Plus is a digital learning service that allows you to learn about a range of topics, from educators including Ivy League professors and other educators from around the world. Go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/eons and get access to a library of different video lectures.
Okay, yeah. So we have heard the case presented. And practically they are saying the whales that we see today used to live on land and have legs, and how they arrive to all this conclusion based on some observed body structure, similarity of body structure between the whales and some kind of fossil being found previously. All right, so they just find that these tools amazingly similar, and begin to relate them and form this whole series of so-called evolution. Now, question is this a presumption or is that a fact? I think it's arguably, it's arguable, yeah? All right, yeah, I think we will stop here today. We'll stop here today. Can I ask whether any question or any comment that you want to raise? Anybody want to say something? Yeah, Singhu, yeah.
So everyone saw 3 videos, and all the videos are very convincing. One is from BBC, and this other 2 where they said it's sponsored, and every time they talk about evolution, they chop fact, right? So I'm sure most of you are challenged, right? Can I see the hands of those who feel you are challenged? Maybe you can raise your hands. Tell us that, you know, like, how do you raise your hands? Something like this. Raise your hands. All of you are still very good after watching all the videos.
Maybe we have. Can you switch on all the video? Switch on the video. Maybe I think we have enough bandwidth. Oh yes, either on raise hand.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. So raise your hands if you think, wow, it's so convincing, right? It sounds so convincing when you read this. So what I just want to comment and to add on to what Brother Mark is showing us is that, you see, over time, there is this thing which I call conflation. The evolution the conflated evolution paradigm. Now, you don't find this in literature yet, but I proposed this to Dr. Don Payton and others that look, by conflating things from the time of Darwin, when he first wrote The Descent of Man, he conflated the idea that all species are descended from one and then man too. So and then he also conflated the idea of natural selection into evolution, which it is today, you see. So today, and then they claim that everything, whether it's mathematics, biology, paleontology, and all field of studies, and all Ivy League professors, everyone is supporting this fact. So after a while, the world is, mentally conditioned to think that, yes, it's a fact, huh? Evolution is a fact. And really what we're trying to do is to really break this down into its components and challenge it. Okay, that's all I want to say today. In my notes, I wrote a bit about this evolution conflated paradigm. So I took a different tack from the textbook, This Evolution Accused, where Dr. Don Batten emphasized that a change of trait doesn't mean a change of an entity. That means your ear can become bigger or smaller, doesn't mean your ear become a nose, right? Or a dog can become different, but doesn't mean it becomes a cat. That is the emphasis here. And where I'm coming from is to emphasize that there's this conditioning that makes us all think that it becomes a paradigm from which a lens from which you view everything and interpret everything. All right. So read also my notes as a companion to this. Thank you. Yeah. And then next week, I think Mark will make it clearer.
Okay. Anyway, next week we will, same like last month, we will do this book, chapter 1, and then the slide that I sent out, I consciously use the same title as a subtitle here, so you can refer to it. Yeah. All right. Any further comment? Anybody? Someone else will make comment? Elder Ong?
No comment from me.
No comment. Okay. If not, then we'll close this meeting, this morning Bible study. So may I invite, maybe Philip, you close us with a word of prayer.
Okay, thank you. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for this morning, Lord. Despite the weather, thank you for bringing the rain, reminding us of the seasons of our life and your presence. Thankful for every day. Thank you for Mark, Lord, and Singhu and the rest who have a hand in preparing this lesson, Lord. We know it's a bit difficult and very scientific, and I pray that, Lord, as we try to understand and listen to all these convincing arguments and videos, Lord, it help us to even strengthen our faith in you, Lord. As the video also admitted that evolution cannot explain the start of life, how life was created, Lord. So God, keep us in you. We pray that this series of studies will help us to understand you more, a little bit about your knowledge and your wisdom, Lord. Pray for the rest of the week as we go into a new month and a new week. Lord, I pray that as our nation goes towards our National Day weekend, Lord, that maybe we be reminded of you, of how you have blessed our countries, despite the weaknesses and criticism of our many leaders, Lord. But we still thank you for the leaders who are here leading our country, and that we will pray for them as you have commanded, Lord. Let us be thankful, and Lord, please watch over us until we meet again next week. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.